Hi, this is David Dickens, and I got a really good question as a follow-up to our three-part series we just finished about, well, how much should I be saving for retirement? Kind of getting down to the granular level. So today what we're going to talk about is how much in dollars should you already have saved, and what percentage of your income should be saving, depending on how old you are. Hopefully this is really good information. It's based on a study from JP Morgan Chase that I feel really good about. I'll go get Walter, and let's get after this one.
Do you need help protecting your finances as you enter retirement? David Dickens of KC Financial Advisors has got you covered. Welcome to the Cover Your Assets KC podcast.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another edition of Cover Your Assets KC. Walter Storholt here alongside David Dickens, based in Overland Park, serving you in Kansas City and beyond. David's the president and wealth advisor of KC Financial Advisors. Find us online at coveryourassetskc.com. David, great to be back with you, my friend. How's life treating you as we approaching the end of April already? Can't believe it.
Yeah, it's we've had a really nice spring here in Kansas City, so it's another good-looking day here, and not playing golf, but it's a beautiful day out there for those who are.
Nice. Well, that's good. Yeah, you'll be back on the course before you know it, I'm sure, right?
Hope so. I'm kind of messing around with a bum knee.
That's right.
That I've never really had before, and it's gotten so irritating that I actually made an appointment with an orthopedic for next week. So we'll see what that guy has to say, and hopefully I am back out there pretty quick.
Well, just like when someone comes in to meet with you and you say, "Okay, what are your goals for retirement?" He's going to ask you, "What are your goals for therapy or for for this visit today?" Get me back on the golf course. That's my goal.
Exactly.
Right?
I want a quick, painless fix.
Yes. I don't care if it's a surgery or a new knee or you just bonk it with a hammer.
No, I care about a lot of those things. I do not really want surgery, and I definitely don't want a new knee.
No, I was just joking. But if it got you out on the course quicker.
Okay, I'll go with that.
That's what I was getting at.
I got a lot of good years left, so
yes,
let's get this thing fixed.
For sure. Hopefully it's just something minor and you're back up and running at full speed soon, my friend.
That's what I'm counting on.
Yeah, I think you'll be all right. Well, we will be thinking about you, David, as you go through that, and best of luck, and let us know how things are feeling here in a couple of weeks next time we chat. In the meantime, let's get to today's conversation. Kind of cool. We just wrapped up our three-part series talking about retirement questions that every generation is asking, but we broke it down by generation. So we talked about the baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. And it sounds like it's led to a lot of follow-up questions, David, and now we can kind of combine all of those generations to say, all right, no matter what generation you are, what's the crux of this whole planning thing? What are we really most concerned about across any generation, no matter where you are in your life?
Exactly. So the question really came from an older millennial, and I thought it was a good question because people kind of want to know, well, put some numbers behind this. Where am I ahead of schedule or behind schedule? And the important thing is that you have your own schedule, not some generic thing that you read on the internet. But after I got this question, I did a little bit of digging around, and I did find a pretty good study by JP Morgan Chase that kind of laid out some numbers as to where people are, depending on their age group, where they should be. And it kind of helps you figure out, all right, am I a little behind or a little bit ahead? And so that's where we're going today, is to look at it by age category and say, well, based on some pretty good analysis, are you ahead or behind? The first thing that I looked at, Walter, and most people know that life expectancy in America is kind of about 74 or 75 years. But that makes the big assumption that nothing bad happens to you when you're a kid or a young adult. And so really, once you get to be 65 and none of that bad stuff has happened to you, the life expectancy has gone up quite a bit. So that has everything to do with how much you should have saved for your retirement. So the statistics right now would say that if you're 65 in America, if you're female, then there's a 54% chance, more than 50-50 chance you're going to live to your 90th birthday and beyond. And if you're a male, 65-year-old, non-smoker, there's a 43% chance that you're going to get to age 90. So if you retire at 65-ish, well, that's 25 years of retirement. That's more than half of the years that you worked that you're going to need to fund your own retirement in the style that you have become accustomed to. So I think that's why, people can get a little bit nervous if they're behind. And then the whole life expectancy and what is medicine going to cost me when I get to be 90 and et cetera. There are just a lot of questions. But life expectancy would tell us you should spend a good amount of time in your 30s, 40s, and 50s figuring out how much you should be saving because you're very likely to live a good long time. So that was kind of the Kickstarter was you're likely to live in retirement 25 or more years. So make sure you have a good savings plan while you're working.
That fact always makes me a little nervous from the planning because a lot of what we plan off of is what people have done in the past. And so if the past advice was, okay, put 10% of your salary into retirement planning and you should be fine. Well, does that still hold true percentage-wise if I do that, even though we're living a lot longer than when maybe that first piece of advice came into fashion? Or should that be 15% I'm saving? And so I could see where those concerns and some of that confusion might come from the younger end of the spectrum, where we wanted to make sure we're kind of doing all the right stuff here on the front end rather than waiting till the end to scramble and catch up.
Exactly. So in about 10 minutes from now, I'm going to be handing out those types of percentages.
Okay, good.
Based on, your age and how much you currently make. And hopefully this all knits together into a pretty understandable picture by the time we're done.
Okay, very good. What's the next little kind of layer to this conversation that you usually walk people through?
Well, so the question is, how much am I going to spend in retirement? And, you are the only person that knows that. And frankly, if you're in your 30s or 40s, you might have no earthly idea.
Kind of hard to make a guess at that, right?
It is kind of hard. However, this analysis that I was reading from JP Morgan Chase, it did a pretty nice job of saying, it had a chart with it that said, well, the more you make, the less you're probably going to need to replace in retirement. But the less you make when you're working, the more percentage you're going to need to replace. Here's how that works out. Let's say that you make $50,000 a year. This estimate would say that you're going to need to replace 94% of that to keep your lifestyle the same when you're retired. And that makes sense. If you're making $50,000 a year, you don't have a ton of extra or extraordinary expenses. You're kind of making ends meet as you go down the road. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say that you make $300,000. Then this analysis says you probably just need to replace 72% of that, or $216,000. You don't have to replace the entire $300,000 because a lot of those expenses, higher taxes, the amount you're putting away for your savings for your retirement, those things go away when you're retired. So you really need a smaller amount the more you make. So that gets gradiated throughout. The other interesting thing on this chart, if you happen to find it on the internet, is of the money that you're going to need for retirement, how much of that is going to be made up by your Social Security check? So if you make $50,000 a year and you're trying to replace 94% of that in retirement, or $47,000, then about 61% of your retirement income is going to be Social Security. So Social Security is really important to you and people making $70,000 and $90,000. That makes up more than 50% of their retirement income. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say you're making $300,000 a year. You're trying to replace it with $216,000 in retirement. Your Social Security check is only going to make up 16% of what you want to have in retirement. So all of a sudden, the amount you're saving for retirement has a really big impact on the quality of life, the amount of money you're going to have to spend, you're going to get to spend in retirement over and above Social Security, because Social Security is not going to make up a big chunk of your retirement income.
Makes sense there, David. So that gives people a little bit of a perspective, I think, on how to plan for that, even if it does still kind of carry a lot of question marks with it. I know we're not done, so I'm really intrigued to get to your next 2 points where it sounds like we start getting to the comparison game, right, and see where we stack up against others at our various ages.
Exactly. So the basic assumptions to this model were these. Your annual gross savings rate for this first set of data would be 10%. So you've been putting away 10% of what you make, and you're going to keep putting away 10%. While you're working, you're going to have a diversified portfolio of 60% stock and 40% bond, which now, since interest rates are up, the bond component is actually carrying its own weight. Once you're retired, this study suggests that you're going to flip that. You're going to go only 40% stock and 60% bond. Because, and based on my experience and my clientele, you tend to get more conservative once you're retired and not having that paycheck coming in every 2 weeks. It expects an inflation rate over the next 30, 40 years of 2.5% a year. It assumes that the retirement age for these people is 65 for the primary earner and the spouse 63, so a little bit younger spouse. And then it assumes that you're going to live 35 years in retirement. That takes you up to age 100. And all the plans that we do here for our clients take you to age 100. We want to make sure that when you're at 100, there's still money left. So those are the basic assumptions for this. What it means for I'm just going to go with Boomer, Gen X, and Millennial, since that's what the prior 3 podcasts were about. A Boomer, age 65, if they want to replace a $200,000 income, they would need to have a little over, just a shade over $2 million saved for retirement. If they want to replace a $200,000 income, that means that they're going to have to replace about 76% of that $200,000 in retirement to make their lifestyle the same. So they would need a couple $1 million saved. Some of their retirement income is going to come from Social Security, about $50,000 of it. And then they're going to need an extra $100,000, a little more than that, coming out of the money that they've saved. $100,000 every year plus inflation for 35 years. So that gives them 75% of the income that they were making while they're working, and that ends up being, $2 million. Well, what if you're 64 and you've only saved $1 million? Well, you have a big problem because you're very unlikely to save $1 million over the next 2 years. So boomers, it's not like everything is now pretty much written, but a whole lot of your retirement story is now written because you're in the retirement red zone. Maybe you're already retired. Maybe you're very close to retiring. Let's say you're a Gen Xer and you are 50 years old. So Gen X, we kind of identified as age 44 to 59. So you're a middle Gen Xer. And let's say you're trying to replace a $200,000 income. Right now, you should have a $1.1 million saved. Let's say you're a Gen Xer and you have $100,000 of current income. Then in that case, you really only need to have a little less than $400,000 right now saved for retirement. And then to pick a number kind of in the middle, if your current household income is $150,000, they're suggesting that you would need to replace 80% of that. And in order to do that, you would already have need to save about $750,000. So the numbers are either going to look big or small to you, depending on how much you've been saving for your own retirement. If you're a millennial, 35 years old, for instance, your household income is currently $100,000, and you want to replace, so $100,000, you would need, based on this study, about 86% of the $100,000 to live on in retirement to make yourself feel the same lifestyle. So if you're 35 and you're trying to replace $100,000 of income, household income, you would need to have saved right now $100,000. If you're trying to replace $150,000 of income and you're 35 years old today, then you should have $240,000 saved for retirement. And if you're trying to replace a $200,000 household income, then this study would say that at 35 you should have already saved $400,000, whether that's in a 401k or a 403b or a 457 or maybe a brokerage account, maybe you inherited some money, whatever your pots of money are, it should be about $400,000 today if you're 35 and you're trying to retire on the equivalent of your $200,000 household income today. So again, those numbers either sound big or small to you depending on how much you've already saved. And then where the rubber hits the road is kind of, this next question is, well, what percentage of my income should I be
what
saving?
gets me there?
What gets me there? And the trick with these numbers is, if you're behind, then what you don't want to do is get disappointed and say, well, I can't get there, so I may as well stop trying. Well, that's a horrible idea. There are lots of opportunities in your 30s and 40s and in your early 50s. You just don't want to get to 60 and be taking a look at this right now. So, to cut to the end of the chase, the answer is it pays to start early. So I've thrown around on this podcast over the years that, save 10%. And then if that's on top of whatever your employer puts in. as a matching deposit. And then as you get a raise each year, hopefully, then you should increase that percentage. And here's what that means. If you're currently 30 years old, a younger millennial, and you haven't saved a penny for retirement, and you want to replace $100,000 of income, then you should start now saving 12% a year. If you are 30 and you want to replace a $200,000 household income, then you need to start saving 15% right now. So not a dramatic difference between replacing 100,000 or 200,000. The dollar amount is different because you're saving 20% of a bigger amount. But the answer there is, if you are a little bit behind, if you haven't started and you're age 30, well, you've got a little bit of catch up to do. If you're right out of school, 25 years old, and you're trying to replace you're trying to replace a $100,000 income when you retire, the numbers would say you should be saving 9% of your money instead of 12% at age 30. For a $200,000 income replacement at 25, you should be saving 12% of your money instead of 15%. The percentages go up really fast once you get older with no savings. So here's the comparison. If you're an older millennial, let's say that you're 40 and you haven't saved a penny for your retirement, you've just been busy doing other stuff and you haven't prioritized this, and now you want to save enough to replace a $100,000 income. Well, at age 30, you had to save 12% of what you make. At age 40, you need to save 20% of what you make, which is a fairly big number for most people. If you are 40 and you want to replace a $200,000 income and you haven't yet started, well, now you need to save 27% out of every paycheck to get you to where you're going, versus age 30, that was only 15%. So the percentage is almost doubled in that decade where you didn't really save anything for retirement. Here's the killer for Gen Xers, 50 years old, who haven't really saved much for retirement. If you're trying to replace a $100,000 income, we already said that age 30, you need to save 12% of what you make. At age 40, you need to save 20% of what you make. If you're age 50 and you haven't yet started for retirement, you're going to need to save 42% of everything you make to replace that $100,000 income at age 65. Now that is incredibly daunting.
Yeah.
At that point, you might just decide, I've kind of missed my original boat. Now what do I do? And you're going to have to reset some expectations. Further out on the roll, and I realize I'm throwing a lot of numbers, but based on who you are, your age, and how much you've saved for retirement, you really only need to remember a couple of these numbers. If you are trying to replace a $200,000 income, we already said that a 30-year-old would need to be saving 15%. A 40-year-old would need to be saving 27%. But if you're 50 and you haven't yet started, you would need to be saving 56% of every paycheck in the hopes of replacing that $200,000 household income. Once you get to 65, you start taking your Social Security and you start drawing down on your retirement savings. So all of a sudden, I don't really know people who save 56% of what they make. It's just
pretty rare to find,
number.
I would think. Yeah,
it's a massive number.
I mean, maybe if you're in that situation and perhaps you're paying off your house, like maybe you had a 15-year loan and that's where you're putting all your extra money, and now that's paid off. Maybe that frees up enough to where you can play some of that catch-up game. But yeah, that's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, and so I love that thought. Everybody's situation is different. And your 50s is kind of the time, usually, where maybe you're getting kids out of college and you're paying off your mortgage, and all of a sudden, you're in your prime earning years. You're able to tuck away significant sums of money. And these numbers would say, well, you have to. So there are lots of good choices that you can make if you start this process in your 20s, 30s, even in your 40s. Once you get into your 50s and definitely in your 60s, your choices become significantly more narrow. That doesn't mean you can't get to where you're going. It just means that you have to be hyper-focused on how much you make, how much you spend, and then, most importantly, how much you're saving for your own retirement to get you to the goals that you hopefully laid out in your 20s and 30s and maybe didn't do quite a good enough job of keeping up with things. And now you've got some catch-up work to do. So that's how the numbers lay out. You can kind of, depending on your situation, wherever you're sitting in your car, you're at home, wherever you are listening to this, you can kind of figure out, well, I know my age and I know how much I've already saved for retirement. And this hopefully will help you figure out, am I ahead? Am I on track? Or am I behind? If you're on track, well, awesome. Good for you. If you're ahead, fantastic. Maybe you retire early. Maybe work becomes optional. If you're behind, well, then maybe you need to look at your expenses. You need to maybe be a little more committed to putting money away for yourself for retirement. And maybe you don't retire at 65 or 67. Maybe you work to 70, which gets you closer to life expectancy, which means you'd be using the money off of your nest egg for 4 or 5 fewer years, which can really extend the life of your nest egg as you're trying to get to age 90 or 95 and make sure you don't run out of money. So lots of good choices earlier than later. But if you find yourself in a box, in a position where you're under saving right now, and you're in your 50s and early 60s, that's where it would be really helpful, I think, to get some really good advice to help you figure out, well, what are the ways that I can do? What changes can I make right now to get myself to the goals that I want to hit by the time I'm 63, 66, 70?
Great outline there, David. Thank you for those details. And yeah, I can see the interest in folks wanting to probably plug in these numbers and try to figure all that out and see if you're ahead or behind. And I know the farther away from retirement you are, maybe the harder it is to wrap your brain around some of the numbers, but at least starts giving us some guardrails, right? That's all we can maybe ask for sometimes is just give me some guardrails. Let me know if I'm close. And then as we get closer, the adjustments maybe are a little bit easier to make as long as we're in the neighborhood.
Exactly. You kind of want to know what the neighborhood looks like.
Yeah.
And if your household is bringing in $300,000 right now, your neighborhood looks different than if your household is bringing in $100,000. Either way, what you'd kind of like to do is retire in the lifestyle that you've become accustomed to. And that's what all this analysis, this terrific study by JP Morgan Chase, and all these numbers are meant to do, is to say, how much do I need? What kind of pot of cash do I need when I retire to make sure that I can maintain a lifestyle that I like, that I've been living for the last 15, 20, 25 years? I would like to live that for the next 15 or 20 or 25 years.
Excellent. Very good. Well, if you've got questions for David, maybe you want to run through some specific numbers for yourself, especially if you're getting closer and closer to retirement and wanting to turn more of those question marks about your plan into answers and more solid and predictable outcomes. That's where you can begin a conversation with David and go through the CPR process, that complete planning review. Overturn all of those stones and see what's underneath and make sure you've got a good plan. It's not going to get you just to retirement, but all the way through it as well. The number to call if you've got questions for David is to pick up the phone and dial 913-317-1414, 913-317-1414, or go online to coveryourassetskc.com. Lots of great resources for you on the website, coveryourassetskc.com, and you can also get in touch that way as well. Just check the description of today's show for contact information and more resources to check out. David, thank you for the guidance and the help. A great follow-up to our generational conversation, I think, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in a few weeks.
I will look forward to it as well, Walter. Thanks.
All right, best of luck on the knee. Hope for good reports from you there in the future episodes, and we'll talk to everybody next time right back here on Cover Your Assets, KC. Advisory services offered through Creative One Wealth, LLC, an investment advisor. KC Financial Advisors and Creative One Wealth, LLC are not affiliated. We are an independent financial services firm helping individuals create retirement strategies using a variety of insurance products to custom suit their needs and objectives. The information and opinions contained in this program have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. They are given for informational purposes only and are not a solicitation to buy or sell any of the products mentioned. The information is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual situation. This material has been provided by a licensed insurance professional for informational and educational purposes only and is not endorsed or affiliated with the Social Security Administration or any government agency. It is not intended to provide and should not be relied upon for accounting, legal, tax, or investment advice.